Sophia's voice was the spark, though she had no idea. I was in my study late one evening, poring over project plans, when I overheard her soft, curious voice drifting in from the living room. "Daddy, why does Uncle Elliot come here so much when you're away?" I froze. The question wasn't accusatory, just an innocent observation from an 8-year-old. But it set my mind reeling. Elliot, my younger brother, was charming, ambitious, and frankly, a master manipulator. We'd always had a complicated relationship, but his recent behavior raised red flags I hadn't yet pieced together. He was suddenly a frequent guest, always friendly but overstepping, whether offering unsolicited business advice or lingering too long at family dinners. And then there was Isabella. My wife had been distant for months. She claimed it was stress, Sophia's health scares, the business, but I could sense something deeper. Her warmth had dulled. Her smile no longer reached her eyes. I'd catch her on her phone late at night, her screen glowing like a secret in the dark. She dismissed my concerns, brushing them off as paranoia. Sophia's innocent words replayed in my mind as I lay awake that night. By morning, I decided I couldn't ignore the gnawing doubt any longer. The next day, I approached Marcus O'Shea, an old college friend and private investigator. He'd been there through thick and thin, someone I trusted completely. I told him everything. Isabella's odd behavior, Elliot's growing presence, and my mounting suspicions. "I need the truth, Marcus. No matter how bad it is." He nodded, his expression grave. "Victor, I'll find it. But you need to brace yourself, because when you start digging, you might uncover more than you're ready for." The waiting was torture. Marcus kept me updated in pieces, and each new revelation felt like a fresh wound. Isabella wasn't just cheating, she was scheming. Late-night meetings with Elliot. Bank transactions tied to obscure shell companies. Conversations that hinted at undermining me at my firm. They weren't just betraying me, they were building a plan to destroy me. The worst part? They used my love for Sophia against me. Marcus discovered records of fabricated doctor visits and false medical claims. Isabella was painting me as a negligent father, creating a paper trail of evidence to strip me of custody. That night, I sat in my car outside our house, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. My sanctuary, my family, it was all a lie. I thought about confronting her right then, storming inside and demanding answers. But Marcus's voice echoed in my head. "If you confront them now, they'll cover their tracks. Be patient." Patience. It was the hardest thing I'd ever had to practice. But if I wanted justice, not just for me but for Sophia, I needed to play the long game. I walked back into the house, pretending everything was fine. Sophia greeted me with a hug, her innocent joy breaking my heart. Isabella smiled, but it was hollow, her eyes darting as if she were measuring my every move. Elliot's name came up over dinner. "He'd stopped by earlier," Isabella said. I swallowed my anger and nodded, masking my emotions behind a polite smile. The storm was coming. They had no idea. The hardest part about playing along was keeping my composure. Every shared meal, every mundane conversation, every moment Isabella brushed past me without a care. It was all fuel for the fire simmering beneath my calm exterior. I had to remind myself constantly. Wait. Watch. Let them believe they've won. Marcus worked quickly, gathering evidence that went beyond suspicion. He installed discreet cameras in my home, expertly hidden in places no one would think to look. Small enough to avoid notice, sharp enough to catch every whisper, every touch. It felt invasive but necessary. Within days, I had the first clip. I'll never forget watching it for the first time. The footage was from the living room. Sophia's toys were scattered on the floor, her school backpack resting by the couch. Isabella was there, speaking softly into her phone. Her voice was calm, measured, too smooth. "Yes, he'll sign it eventually. Victor's meticulous, but he trusts me too much to look too closely. Just give me time." My blood ran cold. The next clip was worse. Elliot had come over while I was at a late meeting. The camera in the kitchen caught them. They stood close, too close. He poured wine into her glass while she leaned against the counter, a smug smile curling her lips. "This'll work, Bella," Elliot said, his tone confident. "He's too tied up in his projects to notice anything until it's too late." She laughed lightly, sipping the wine. "He's predictable. That's his biggest flaw. He's always so careful, so measured. That's what makes it easy. I stopped the video there. My stomach churned, bile rising in my throat. Isabella, my wife, the woman I had built a life with, mocked my strengths as weaknesses. Elliot, my own brother, stood beside her like an eager partner in crime. When I showed the footage to Marcus, he nodded grimly. This is good, Victor. It's damning. But we need more. More. I didn't think I could stomach more. But Marcus was right. Exposing their betrayal wasn't enough. I needed irrefutable proof of their conspiracy, their plans to strip me of my firm, my reputation, my family. That's when Marcus brought in Hannah Cartwright, a financial expert and someone I'd heard of through mutual connections. She dove into Elliot's financials with precision, uncovering layers of fraud and deception. Payments funneled through shell companies. Altered project specifications on my firm's contracts. It was an intricate web, but piece by piece, we unraveled it. The bombshell came one evening when Marcus called me. Victor, you're going to want to sit down for this. He walked me through the trail Hannah had discovered. Elliot had been siphoning money from my firm for months, setting up fake contracts with non-existent vendors. But that wasn't all. Isabella had her hands in it too. She wasn't just aware of the fraud, she was actively participating. They were setting me up to take the fall. I clenched my fists, my nails biting into my palms. What about Sophia? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. They're using her too. We're working on that, Marcus said. But Victor, they're building a case to paint you as negligent. If we don't get ahead of this, they could use those claims against you in court. The weight of it all pressed down on me, but I refused to let it crush me. I wasn't going to let them win. That night, as I tucked Sophia into bed, she wrapped her small arms around my neck and whispered, "Daddy, are you okay? You've been quiet lately." I kissed her forehead, forcing a smile. "I'm okay, sweetheart. Just busy with work." She nodded, satisfied, and drifted off to sleep. But as I stood by her bedside, watching her tiny chest rise and fall, I made a silent vow. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about protecting her, making sure the people who betrayed me never had the chance to hurt her again. With every passing day, my resolve hardened. This wasn't just betrayal, it was war, and I wasn't going to lose. Hannah's work on the financial trail had revealed enough to make my head spin. Elliot had used his charm to pull off deals that looked legitimate on the surface but fell apart under scrutiny. Shell companies, doctored documents, inflated expenses. It was all there. And Isabella wasn't just a bystander. She was the one pulling strings behind the scenes, using her position as my wife to gain access to accounts, emails, and signatures. The worst part was knowing how much faith I had put in both of them. It made their betrayal sting all the more. I started crafting my plan. It was going to take time, precision, and a level of patience I didn't know I had in me. Marcus worked on securing surveillance footage and gathering documentation, while Hannah focused on tightening the financial noose. We needed everything airtight before making a move. Meanwhile, I kept up the act. I'd sit across from Isabella at dinner, listen to her talk about Sophia's school projects or how tired she was from running errands, and pretend nothing was wrong. I even asked her advice on some new designs I was working on, just to maintain the illusion of normalcy. Elliot was trickier. He'd swing by unannounced with that easy grin of his, acting like the golden boy he always wanted to be. I started giving him just enough rope to hang himself, subtly encouraging his overconfidence. When he mentioned a new potential client he was courting on behalf of the firm, I made a mental note. It was a name Marcus had flagged earlier, another fake. "Sounds promising," I told him, keeping my tone neutral. "Let me know if you need any help sealing the deal." "Oh, I've got it covered," he replied, puffing out his chest. "You've got enough on your plate." Little did he know, I was already 10 steps ahead. The turning point came one evening when Marcus handed me a USB drive. "This is it," he said. "Proof of Isabella's role in fabricating Sophia's medical records. There's enough here to take them both down." I stared at the tiny device in my palm, feeling its weight despite its size. "How bad is it?" Marcus hesitated. "Bad. Isabella's been building a case to make you look negligent. Missed appointments, phantom illnesses, even accusations of emotional instability. She's got documents to back it up, but they're all fake. We've got the forgeries on tape. I clenched my jaw, my mind racing. And Sophia? She's safe for now, Marcus assured me. But if Isabella had her way, she'd use this to cut you out of her life entirely. The thought of losing Sophia was unbearable. It was the last push I needed. That night, I couldn't sleep. Instead, I sat in my study, staring at the architectural sketches spread out before me. They were plans for a new corporate headquarters I'd been working on for months, but my mind wasn't on the project. It was on the structure of my revenge. I sketched out timelines, contingencies, and traps, everything needed to ensure Elliot and Isabella couldn't wriggle free. If they wanted to play games with my life, I'd show them I could play harder, smarter, and with far more devastating consequences. The first step was subtle. I began introducing slight delays in the projects Elliot was handling, feeding just enough misinformation to create discrepancies. At the same time, I ensured Isabella had access to private documents, which were carefully planted traps designed to make her overconfident. Soon, the cracks began to show. Elliot's client meetings started going south, and Isabella became increasingly irritable, snapping at Sophia over minor things and growing paranoid whenever I mentioned work. I stayed calm, methodical, and above all, patient. They thought they were in control, but they didn't realize they were walking into a web of their own making. By the time I was ready to strike, the evidence was overwhelming. Financial fraud, fabricated records, surveillance footage. Marcus and Hannah had done their part brilliantly, and now it was up to me to deliver the final blow. As I looked at my reflection in the mirror that morning, I felt a surge of clarity. I wasn't the man they thought they could manipulate anymore. This was a new Victor Ellsworth, stronger, smarter, and ready to take back everything they tried to steal. It was time to set the trap. The trap was a masterpiece of precision, built with the same care I'd put into designing skyscrapers. Every piece of evidence was in place, every step calculated to leave no room for escape. I began by giving Isabella and Elliot what they craved most, the illusion of victory. Over the next few weeks, I acted defeated. I worked fewer hours, missed key meetings, and let Elliot take on more responsibilities at the firm. I even let Isabella handle household finances, playing the part of the distracted, overworked husband. "Victor, you're so stressed," Isabella cooed one evening, placing her hand on mine at dinner. "You need to take a step back. Let Elliot and I take care of things." I forced a weary smile. "You're right. I've been pushing myself too hard." Elliot grinned like a wolf, all but licking his chops. "Don't worry, big brother. I've got everything under control." I nodded, pretending not to notice the smug glint in his eyes. Behind the scenes, Marcus and Hannah worked tirelessly. Hannah's financial expertise had uncovered the full extent of Elliot's fraudulent dealings, while Marcus pieced together a timeline of Isabella's betrayals. We had everything: forged contracts, fraudulent bank transfers, doctored medical records, and even video evidence of their late-night rendezvous. But the real coup de grace was a set of forged, confidential documents I had Marcus plant in Isabella's desk. These fake documents outlined a supposed legal investigation into the firm, complete with dire consequences that would threaten the entire company. I knew they couldn't resist using it to their advantage. Sure enough, within days, I noticed changes. Isabella was suddenly spending hours locked in her office, and Elliot stopped dropping by unannounced. They thought they'd found the smoking gun that would bring me down. One evening, as Isabella prepared for bed, she casually mentioned an idea. "Victor, have you ever thought about selling the firm? With all the stress you've been under, it might be the best thing for our family." I pretended to mull it over, hiding my rage behind a thoughtful expression. "It's crossed my mind," I said. "But we'd need to be careful. A lot of people depend on the firm." She nodded, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Of course. I just think it's something to consider." The next morning, I made a show of leaving for work early, but instead of heading to the office, I met Marcus at a coffee shop downtown. "They're biting," I told him. Marcus grinned. "Good. Now it's time to reel them in." The trap was set to spring at the upcoming board meeting, a quarterly review where I planned to expose everything in one fell swoop. But first, I needed one last piece of leverage. That evening, as Isabella and Sophia played a board game in the living room, I quietly slipped into Isabella's office. I knew she wouldn't keep the forged documents in plain sight, but I also knew her habits well enough to guess where they'd be. It didn't take long. Tucked in the bottom drawer of her desk, hidden beneath a stack of old papers, were the documents, annotated in Isabella's handwriting. I photographed every page, my hand steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. This was it, the final piece of the puzzle. As I stood there in the dim light of her office, I felt a mix of emotions: anger, betrayal, sadness, and something unexpected, relief. For the first time in months, I knew I was in control. The next morning, I kissed Sophia goodbye before heading to work. "I'll see you tonight, sweetheart," I told her, my voice steadier than it had been in weeks. The board meeting was set for 2 p.m., and by 1:45, the room was filled. Elliot sat confidently at the head of the table, his arms draped casually over the chair. Isabella arrived moments later, dressed impeccably and exuding an air of quiet triumph. I arrived last, my entrance unremarkable. As I took my seat, I caught Elliot's eye. He smirked, clearly savoring what he thought was his impending victory. But by the end of that meeting, his smirk would be gone. It was time to bring everything crashing down. The atmosphere in the boardroom was thick with anticipation. Elliot, seated at the head of the table, was relishing the moment. His confidence oozed through his every gesture, the smug smile, the casual way he adjusted his cufflinks, as if he already owned the room. Isabella sat nearby, her poise sharp and calculating, a quiet puppet master pulling strings. I walked in and took my usual seat at the other end of the long table. The room quieted, the faint hum of the air conditioner filling the void. "Let's begin," Elliot said, leaning forward with a false air of authority. "Victor, we've noticed a number of issues within the company over the last quarter. Mismanagement, delays, and now legal threats. I think it's time we discuss a more stable leadership strategy." I leaned back in my chair, keeping my expression neutral. "Go on," I said. He looked around, pausing for effect. "The board has expressed concerns about your recent performance. We've reviewed the financials, and there are troubling discrepancies. It might be time for you to take a step back, for the good of the firm." Elliot's words hung in the air like a challenge. I glanced at the other board members, noting their nervous expressions. They weren't in on his scheme, but the seeds of doubt he'd planted were beginning to sprout. "That's an interesting perspective, Elliot," I replied calmly. "But before we make any decisions, there's something I'd like to share with the board." I stood and walked to the front of the room, pulling a small remote from my pocket. The projector flickered to life behind me, displaying the first slide, a detailed financial chart showing embezzled funds. "This," I began, "is a breakdown of financial discrepancies we discovered during a recent internal audit. Funds were funneled through shell companies, false contracts were issued, and project costs were inflated. The trail led directly to one of our own." Elliot's smile faltered. He shot a quick glance at Isabella, whose expression remained frozen, her knuckles white as she gripped her pen. I clicked to the next slide, copies of the fake contracts, complete with Elliot's forged signature and timestamps matching his logged work hours. The room erupted in murmurs. Elliot tried to interrupt. "This is absurd." I raised a hand, silencing him. "Please, Elliot, let me finish. It gets better." The next slide was a video clip from Marcus's surveillance footage. Elliot and Isabella, huddled together in my kitchen, discussing the forged documents. "If Victor goes down, we can rebuild the company in our image," Elliot's voice played through the speakers. "It'll be a fresh start, with no one questioning our decisions." Gasps rippled through the room. Elliot's face turned ashen, and Isabella's composure cracked, her jaw tightening as she stared daggers at me. "And that's not all," I said, my voice steady but sharp. I clicked to another slide, revealing Isabella's fabricated medical claims for Sophia. "These are the false medical records Isabella submitted to insurance agencies, claiming Sophia was chronically ill. Not only is this fraud, but it also weaponized my daughter's health to build a case against me." At this, the murmurs grew louder, outrage evident in the board members' faces. "Finally," I said, turning to the room with a calm intensity, "we have here a signed document from Isabella and Elliot. Another forgery, crafted to make me appear negligent in my duties as both a father and a CEO. They were planning to use it as leverage in court to strip me of custody of my daughter and ownership of this company." I dropped the remote on the table, letting the silence fill the room. Elliot stammered, his face a portrait of panic. This is a setup. Victor's trying to frame us. I crossed my arms, my expression unyielding. The evidence is overwhelming, Elliot. You and Isabella were careless. You thought you could outsmart me, but you underestimated my ability to see through your lies. At that moment, the doors to the boardroom opened, and 2 government inspectors walked in, accompanied by Marcus. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus announced, "these inspectors are here to review company records based on the evidence we've provided of fraud and embezzlement." Panic ensued. Elliot shot out of his chair, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You think you're so smart, Victor? This isn't over." "Oh, it's very much over," I replied coldly. "You betrayed me, Elliot. You betrayed this company, and you betrayed our family. Now, you'll face the consequences." Isabella, who had remained silent throughout, finally broke. "Victor, you don't understand." "Don't," I cut her off, my voice like steel. "Don't you dare try to justify this. You betrayed me, Isabella. You used our daughter as a pawn. There's no coming back from that." The inspectors began collecting documents as the board members watched in stunned silence. Elliot and Isabella were escorted out of the room, their protests falling on deaf ears. As the doors closed behind them, I turned to the board. "Ladies and gentlemen, the truth is out. Elliot and Isabella betrayed us all, but the firm will recover. Together, we'll rebuild." The room erupted in applause. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. The storm had broken, and I was still standing. The fallout began almost immediately. News of the scandal spread like wildfire, leaking to the media within hours of the board meeting. By the next morning, headlines painted Elliot and Isabella as villains in a drama more suited to tabloids than corporate news. "Family betrayal rocks Ellsworth architecture firm. Architect Victor Ellsworth unveils stunning fraud allegations against wife and brother." The press couldn't get enough. For years, I'd kept my private life out of the spotlight, focusing on my reputation as an innovative architect and reliable leader. Now, the world saw a different side of me, a husband and father betrayed, a man who fought back with precision and grace. I didn't make any public statements at first. Marcus advised me to let the evidence speak for itself, and he was right. Every detail we had unveiled during the board meeting became public record as the investigation deepened. Elliot's fraud was exposed in exhaustive detail. The shell companies, the altered contracts, and the fake vendors. Hannah's meticulous work left no room for doubt, and within days, his accounts were frozen. Isabella wasn't spared either. Her forged medical records for Sophia came to light, leading to swift legal action. But the media didn't stop there. The personal betrayal was too juicy to ignore. Talk shows debated the ethics of family loyalty versus justice. Commentators speculated about my marriage, some defending Isabella as a misguided wife, others condemning her as a calculating conspirator. And then came the humiliation Isabella feared most, the public airing of her affair with Elliot. A leaked photo of the two of them at a boutique hotel, a piece of evidence Marcus had handed over to law enforcement, hit the front pages. It was damning. Isabella and Elliot, caught laughing over drinks, oblivious to the cameras capturing their betrayal. Sophia, thankfully, was shielded from the worst of it. I made sure she stayed off social media and kept her routine as normal as possible. She was too young to grasp the depth of what was happening, but old enough to sense the tension. "Daddy, why are people talking about Mommy and Uncle Elliot?" she asked one evening, her innocent eyes searching mine for answers. I crouched down, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Sometimes, adults make bad choices, sweetheart. But none of this is your fault. Mommy loves you, and I love you more than anything. That's what matters." She nodded, though her little face still held confusion. It broke my heart, but I vowed to protect her from the chaos swirling around us. Isabella tried reaching out several times after the scandal broke, leaving messages full of half-hearted apologies and desperate pleas. "Victor, we need to talk," her voice crackled through one voicemail. "I know you're angry, but you have to understand. I didn't mean for things to go this far. I was scared, and Elliot. He manipulated me. Please, for Sophia's sake, let's talk." I deleted every message without replying. There was nothing left to say. Elliot, predictably, went into full damage control mode. Through his lawyer, he denied all allegations, calling the evidence circumstantial, and claiming I'd orchestrated a smear campaign. But his bravado crumbled when more details emerged, details he hadn't accounted for. Hannah had uncovered records of Elliot siphoning money not just from my firm but from smaller subcontractors, effectively ruining their businesses. Testimonies from former employees painted him as ruthless and arrogant, a man who saw rules as obstacles to be ignored. As for Isabella, her social circle evaporated overnight. Friends who once flocked to her for advice and favors now avoided her like the plague. Even the charities she supported quietly removed her name from their donor lists. The final blow came when her parents issued a public statement. I didn't expect it, it wasn't their style, but when it arrived, it was scathing. We are heartbroken by our daughter's actions and the pain she has caused Victor and Sophia. We do not condone her behavior and hope she reflects deeply on the harm she has done. It was a small vindication, but it felt significant. In the midst of it all, I focused on rebuilding. My team at Ellsworth Innovations rallied behind me, their loyalty unwavering. Together, we launched a campaign to restore the firm's reputation, emphasizing integrity and resilience. But for me, it wasn't just about the company. It was about showing Sophia, and myself, that no betrayal, no matter how deep, could break us. The wreckage of Elliot and Isabella's lives was their own doing, and as they scrambled to salvage what little remained, I turned my attention to the future. It was time to move forward. They thought they'd destroyed me. They couldn't have been more wrong. As the public storm raged, the legal machinery began to grind. Marcus had ensured the evidence was airtight, and now the courts were prepared to act. Elliot and Isabella found themselves facing lawsuits from multiple angles. Elliot's fraudulent schemes drew immediate attention from both corporate and federal investigators. The shell companies he'd used to launder funds were exposed, and the amounts he'd stolen over time left even the seasoned prosecutors shaking their heads. It wasn't just the theft, it was the sheer arrogance of it. He had created fake invoices and routed payments to accounts under false names, but the trail of money was too clumsy to hold up under scrutiny. Hannah had made sure of that. The charges were damning: embezzlement, corporate fraud, and forgery, each carrying severe penalties. Elliot tried to plead ignorance, painting himself as a victim of poor accounting practices and administrative errors. But the evidence said otherwise, and his smug demeanor during depositions only made things worse. For Isabella, the fallout was equally brutal. The fabricated medical records for Sophia had led to charges of insurance fraud and child endangerment. The court didn't take kindly to her weaponizing her own daughter for personal gain. When the trial began, I had to testify. Sitting in the witness box, I felt the weight of years of betrayal pressing on my chest. But I kept my voice steady, recounting the steps that had led to this moment. My trust was broken, I said, meeting Isabella's gaze across the courtroom. She looked down, avoiding my eyes. But the worst part wasn't what they did to me, it was how they used my daughter as a pawn. No parent should ever have to see their child manipulated like that. My testimony was bolstered by Marcus's evidence. The surveillance footage, the forged documents, the financial records. Piece by piece, the puzzle came together, painting a damning picture of their conspiracy. Isabella's lawyer tried to play the sympathy card, portraying her as a desperate mother driven by fear and manipulation. But her own words, captured on tape, told a different story, one of calculated deception and greed. When the verdicts came, it was like the final slam of a gavel on their lives. Elliot was convicted on multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement. The sentence was harsh, 8 years in prison, with hefty fines that wiped out what little remained of his ill-gotten gains. Isabella's punishment was no less severe. She received 5 years for her role in the fraud, with additional charges of insurance fraud and falsifying medical records. The court deemed her actions as a mother especially reprehensible, and custody of Sophia was granted to me without contest. I should have felt triumphant, but there was no joy in watching them fall. Just a grim sense of justice being served. After the trial, Isabella reached out one last time, requesting a meeting. Against my better judgment, I agreed. I wanted closure, not for her, but for myself. We met at a sterile visitation room in the county jail. She looked smaller, diminished, her once pristine appearance replaced by the drab uniform of an inmate. "Victor," she began, her voice trembling, I wanted to say I'm sorry. I studied her, searching for sincerity. Sorry for what? I asked. For everything, she said, her eyes filling with tears. For hurting you, for betraying your trust, for dragging Sophia into this. I didn't think it would end like this. Her words rang hollow. Maybe she meant them, or maybe she was just desperate. Either way, it didn't matter anymore. I hope you mean that, Isabella, I said, my voice calm but firm. Because you destroyed something I thought was unbreakable. But I've moved on. My focus is on Sophia now. On giving her the life she deserves. She nodded, her tears spilling over. I hope you can forgive me someday, she whispered. I don't know if I can, I replied honestly. But I'll try, for Sophia's sake. I stood to leave, and as I turned away, I felt a strange sense of release. The weight of her betrayal no longer felt as heavy. This chapter was closing. It was time to look ahead, not back. With the court battles over, life began to settle into a new rhythm. It wasn't easy, I'd been knocked down in ways I never thought possible, but for Sophia's sake, I knew I had to rebuild. She was my anchor through it all, her innocence a reminder of what mattered most. Every time she laughed or shared her dreams about becoming an artist like her favorite storybook characters, I felt a glimmer of hope. One evening, as I helped her with her homework, she looked up and said, "Daddy, are things going to be okay now?" Her question hit me hard. I took a deep breath and smiled gently. "Yes, sweetheart. Things are going to be better than okay. I promise." Part of keeping that promise meant facing the mess Elliot and Isabella left behind. The firm was still standing, but its reputation had taken a hit. To rebuild trust, I initiated a company-wide overhaul. We rebranded as Ellsworth Innovations, with transparency and accountability as our core values. I worked closely with my team to strengthen oversight, ensuring there'd never be another Elliot in our ranks. The staff rallied behind me, their support unwavering. They'd seen the betrayal firsthand and knew how much I'd sacrificed to protect the firm. Together, we weathered the storm, and slowly but surely, clients began to return. At home, I focused on creating a sense of stability for Sophia. Our routines became sacred. Breakfast together every morning, bedtime stories at night, and Saturday outings to the park or museum. She loved those moments, and so did I. But even with progress, the shadows of the past lingered. There were moments when I'd catch Sophia staring out the window, her brow furrowed in thought. "Do you miss Mommy?" I asked her one night as I tucked her in. She hesitated, then nodded. "I miss when she used to play with me and tell me stories." "But," she trailed off, biting her lip. "But what, sweetheart?" She looked down at her hands. "Sometimes I get mad at her for what she did to you." Her words broke my heart. "It's okay to feel that way," I said, holding her close. "What happened wasn't your fault, and it's okay to love her and still be upset. Just remember, I'm always here for you. Always." She nodded against my chest, and I stayed with her until she fell asleep. Meanwhile, I started reconnecting with parts of myself I'd neglected during the chaos. I took up sketching again, rediscovering the joy of creating without deadlines or client expectations. I also reconnected with old friends, including Marcus, whose loyalty and skill had been instrumental in my survival. One unexpected ally was Hannah Cartwright. After months of working together, we'd formed a bond built on mutual respect. She was sharp, no-nonsense, and refreshingly honest, a stark contrast to the duplicity I'd endured. One evening, after a particularly productive meeting at the firm, she lingered as the rest of the team filed out. "Victor, can I ask you something?" she said, her tone hesitant. "Of course," I replied, setting down my pen. "Have you thought about what's next for you? Outside of the firm, I mean." Her question caught me off guard. "I've been so focused on rebuilding, I haven't really thought about anything else," I admitted. She smiled faintly. "Maybe it's time you did. You've been through hell, but you've come out stronger. Don't forget to take care of yourself, too." Her words stayed with me. That night, as I sat in my study, I started to think about what I wanted, not just for Sophia or the firm, but for myself. For so long, my identity had been tied to my role as a husband, father, and architect. Now, with one of those roles shattered, I realized I had a chance to redefine what mattered most. The road ahead wasn't clear, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like mine to choose. Life began to take on a new rhythm. Sophia's laughter filled the house more often, and I could see the joy returning to her face. She'd spend hours with her sketchbook, showing me her drawings with pride. One day, she held up a picture of a house with a sprawling garden and asked, "Do you think you could build this one day, Daddy?" I smiled, ruffling her hair. "It's beautiful. Maybe we'll design houses together when you're older." The firm was on the mend, but rebuilding wasn't just about restoring its finances. It was about creating a culture of trust and openness. Employees, once hesitant, now came forward with bold ideas. Together, we rebranded as Ellsworth Innovations, focusing on integrity and transparency. Hannah became an integral part of the team, her sharp insights guiding us through challenges. One evening, after a long day, we sat in the office break room, sipping coffee. "You've done an incredible job turning this place around," she said. I shook my head. "I couldn't have done it without you." She laughed softly. "You had the vision. You just needed someone to remind you of it." For a moment, we locked eyes, and I felt a faint flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Connection, uncomplicated and genuine. I wasn't ready to pursue anything new, but it reminded me that life had room for possibility. Not all relationships were as easy to repair. My parents, who had been distant during the chaos, began reaching out more frequently. My mother expressed regret over Elliot's actions and their failure to see the warning signs. "We were blindsided," she said on a call. "I don't know how we missed what he was doing." I kept the conversation civil, mostly for Sophia's sake. Rebuilding with them would take time, and I wasn't sure I wanted to try. Then, one day, a letter arrived. The handwriting was unmistakably Elliot's. I stared at it for a while, debating whether to open it. Finally, I unfolded the page and read, "Victor, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I want you to understand. I never meant for things to go this far. I was jealous of your success, your life, your family. I let that jealousy consume me, and I made choices I'll regret forever. I'm sorry for what I did to you, to Sophia, and even to Isabella. She didn't deserve the fallout. I hope someday you can find it in your heart to forgive me. If not, I understand. But please know that I'll carry this guilt with me forever." The letter left me conflicted. Part of me wanted to crumple it up and forget it existed. Another part felt pity for the man who had torn so much apart out of envy. In the end, I chose not to respond. Some wounds couldn't be healed, and some bridges were better left in ruins. As winter set in, Sophia and I decorated the house for the holidays. We baked cookies, hung lights, and sat together in the glow of the tree. She was happier now, freer, and it gave me hope. One night, as we admired the decorations, she looked up at me and asked, "Daddy, will it always just be us?" I pulled her close, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "For now, yes. And that's enough, isn't it?" She smiled and nodded, resting her head on my shoulder. "Yeah, it is." As the lights twinkled in the quiet, I felt peace settle over me. For the first time in a long while, it truly felt like things were going to be okay. The years that followed weren't without challenges, but they were filled with growth. Sophia thrived, her creativity blossoming into a passion for art. She became my greatest source of inspiration, her resilience a mirror of my own. Together, we carved out a life built on trust, love, and laughter. Something neither Elliot nor Isabella could take away. The firm, now Ellsworth Innovations, regained its footing and more. Our reputation, once threatened, became a beacon of integrity in the industry. Clients trusted us, not just because of our work but because we had weathered a storm and emerged stronger. I poured my energy into mentoring young architects, including Sophia, who, as a teenager, would sit beside me sketching out designs and dreaming big. Isabella faded from our lives. Though she occasionally sent letters to Sophia, I left the choice of responding to her. Sophia wrote back sporadically, her words kind but distant. "I love her," she told me once, "but she doesn't feel like my mom anymore." I didn't press her. She deserved to navigate that relationship on her own terms. Elliot's fate was a quieter one. After serving his time, he disappeared from public view. Occasionally, whispers about him surfaced, a job here, a failed project there, but I paid them little mind. Whatever life he rebuilt was his to live, far away from mine. Hannah stayed by my side, not just as a colleague but as a friend who had become family. Over time, friendship deepened into something more. It wasn't dramatic or rushed, just a steady realization that I could let someone in again. By the time Sophia left for college, Hannah and I had built a relationship rooted in honesty and respect, a stark contrast to the chaos I'd endured before. On the day Sophia graduated from college, I looked around at the life we had rebuilt. My daughter, radiant and confident, hugged me tightly as we posed for photos. "We did it, Dad," she whispered, her voice filled with pride. I smiled, my heart full. "No, sweetheart. You did it." Years later, I found myself standing in a corner office overlooking the city, a building Sophia and I had designed together. The skyline stretched out before me, a symbol of everything we had overcome. Sophia, now a brilliant architect in her own right, joined me at the window. "You know, Dad, none of this would have happened without you." I shook my head. "No, Sophia. It happened because we didn't let them win." She smiled, her eyes filled with the same fire that had carried us through the darkest times. As I watched her walk away to greet her colleagues, I felt a profound sense of peace. I had reclaimed everything they tried to take. My name, my legacy, and most importantly, my family. This wasn't just a story of betrayal and revenge. It was a story of resilience, love, and the strength to rebuild. What they destroyed, we made stronger. And the life we created was ours, unshakable and true.